I'm so sorry, ma'am. I know you need this medicine, but it looks like it's not covered by your insurance.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to deny that one.
Wait, who are you?
I'm your insurance company's pharmacy benefit manager. I get paid based on the price of a medicine, and I don't make as much money off this one.
No one should stand between you and your medicine. Visit phrma.org/middleman to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
When I heard the Senate was meeting to consider new Supreme Court ethical rules today, I knew exactly who I wanted to speak with. Jeremy Fogel. That is, Judge Jeremy Fogel. He's retired now, but still.
I mean, I describe myself as an ethics geek. My first committee work when I was a state court judge, a young state court judge in California in the 1980s, my first committee assignment was to be on the state's Judicial Ethics Committee. And I became the chair of that committee.
That was just a start. A few years later, Fogel took over a committee that reviewed judges' financial disclosure forms. After retiring from the bench, he made a career educating judges about their ethical obligations. What I'm saying is, when it comes to judicial ethics, he's the guy. As you can imagine, Judge Fogel has watched with increasing horror over the last year as Supreme Court justices ensnared themselves in one ethical scandal after another, accepting free plane rides and boat trips, getting their government staff to sell their books. He can't help comparing it with his own experience as a judge. Like this one time when he was working in federal court, Judge Fogel's teenage son had gotten pretty close with a rich classmate, like private plane rich. One of this kid's parents was the CEO of a big company. Anyway, his son gets invited on a ski vacation with his family.
And so when that happened, I said, okay, well, from now on, I'm not hearing any cases involving that company. I don't want the appearance that somehow there's any connection. And it wasn't like at that time I even had a case involving that company. And certainly
you just had a standing list, it sounds like.
Most federal judges do. You have a recusal list. And you know, you put your friends on there, like, you know, if social friends whose cases you shouldn't hear, or any other situation, if you own stock in a company.
That just seems so different from what's going on right now in Washington.
That's true. And I think you could talk to any, as I said, you could talk to almost any judge in the country other than the Supreme Court justices, and they would have a story like that.
Does that frustrate you?
It does, which is why I care so much about this particular issue.
But even though Democratic senators seem fired up to impose a brand new code of conduct on the Supremes, Judge Fogel, he is not particularly optimistic about their efforts.
You know, I've been very clear about this. I think the court should adopt a code of conduct too. I feel that very strongly. I'm skeptical about the ability of the Congress to do anything about it because of the political divisions.
Today on the show, Judge Fogel has got his own ideas for how to fix the Supreme Court's ethical mess. He's also got some thoughts about how the justices got themselves here. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey, listeners, whether you love a true crime or comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? Guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance, too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance. They will show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now that is something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at Progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
I'm so sorry, ma'am. I know you need this medicine, but it looks like it's not covered by your insurance.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to deny that one.
Wait, who are you?
I'm your insurance company's pharmacy benefit manager. I get paid based on the price of a medicine, and I don't make as much money off this one.
No one should stand between you and your medicine. Visit phrma.org/middleman to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
I want to get something out of the way before we really get into it here. You know and respect the justices of the Supreme Court. Like, how would you characterize your relationship with someone like Chief Justice John Roberts?
I want to stress I'm not social friends with any of them, so it's not like it's that kind of relationship. But professionally, I had fairly frequent interaction with the justices when I was the head of the Federal Judicial Center, which is the organization that exists to educate federal judges and senior judicial officials. And I was the director of that for 7 years. And as part of that role, I was in pretty regular contact with the justices and would go to circuit conferences where they were and would talk to them and sometimes even share a meal with one or more of them. So I had those kinds of contacts. And then for the chief, he was essentially my boss. He was the chair of the board that governed the Federal Judicial Center, and he was the person who I ultimately reported to.
Yeah, I mean, you followed him for a long time, and you've kept track of like how he thinks and talks about ethics. Like one of the things I think is interesting is that you've pointed out that while this year has been this kind of banner year where lots of people are talking about Supreme Court ethics and rules and what's going on here, the Chief Justice has been talking about this for a while. In fact, he did a year-end report in 2011 where he mentioned the possibility of more rules for the justices.
I mean, and I want to spend a minute on this. He said at the end of that year in his year-end report that there had been calls for the court to have more rules, but he didn't feel that the court needed them.
Before talking about why the Chief Justice has historically said the Supreme Court is A-OK ethically, it's worth zooming out to talk about how weird ethical rules are for judges in this country. All judges, like the entire judiciary, they all rely on something called the Code of Judicial Conduct to guide their behavior. But this document, it's just a set of aspirational rules. And if you break one, it's not like breaking the law. That said, lower courts have a whole system to help judges stay on the straight and narrow. Committees that'll give advice if a judge is worried they might be doing something wrong, and a disciplinary mechanism for when they veer off course. The Supreme Court has none of that. We're simply relying on the Chief Justice's word that he and his colleagues are on the up and up.
The problem with the lack of transparency is you don't know what each justice is doing. And I have the definite sense that justices see the imperatives differently. And I think that's why you get the controversies that we're having now. For lower court judges, there is a process. It's not a mandatory code of conduct. It's not the kind of thing where, you have to check a box and do X. It's more like if you do something that is contrary to the code of conduct, and you're a lower court judge, and somebody complains about it, that there is a process for reviewing those complaints.
There's an implied threat.
Exactly. You could be there could be a complaint made to the chief judge of the circuit in which you sit, and it's not something you want to have happen to you.
When you were a judge, did you have moments where you were like, is this worth the potential pain in the butt?
I ask myself that question all the time. I coached soccer for a number of years. It was a game I really loved, and I coached a youth team, and some of the people on the team had parents who were lawyers, and they all went on my recusal list. It's just like, why do I want that trouble? Why do I want somebody raising an eyebrow and saying, he was favoring that lawyer because, his son is the star midfielder on my team or something.
You've written about how judges in the lower courts, they don't like these rules necessarily. Like, they are a pain, but it's functional to have people to have this implied threat. Whereas like the only difference with the Supreme Court is because there is no implied threat, there is no pain. And therefore There's no reason to actually go the extra mile, I guess.
I think that's right. I think part of the reason why there are the kinds of situations we're dealing with now is because you don't have, as you describe it, the pain in the butt. There isn't the immediate consequence if you do something that's questionable that lower court judges do. I mean, a friend of mine once described the Supreme Court justices as rock stars. These folks have an enormous amount of power.
And it's concentrated.
And they have personas, and it's not that they don't all have the same personas, but I mean, they have, they're public figures in a way that lower court judges are not.
You've talked about how the Supreme Court justices have this kind of Talmudic relationship with their code of ethics. It's just like they consult it and they divine from it what it means to them. Why isn't there an enforcement mechanism here, though? Because there is one for the lower courts.
So this gets into constitutional law. The Supreme Court actually is the only court that is actually specifically created by the Constitution. The Constitution gives the Congress the ability to create other courts. So every federal court that exists apart from the Supreme Court is a creature of Congress. So because of that, Congress can also mandate certain things. They can't tell judges how to decide cases, but they can certainly have jurisdictional restrictions. They can, they make the laws that the courts have to apply, and they can require some kind of ethical oversight. The Supreme Court is a creature of the Constitution, and I think their view has been, and I know this is the Chief's view, I'm not telling any secrets, that for Congress to assert institutional control over the Supreme Court would create a constitutional conflict.
This question, whether Congress controls the court, is really important. And not just because the Democrats in the Senate now want to make the court follow a code of ethics, but because of something called the Ethics in Government Act. This legislation clearly states that government entities need to disclose certain financial transactions, especially if they look a little shady. It's something Judge Fogel knows a lot about because he used to be one of the people reviewing those disclosures. But just like with the Code of Conduct, the Supreme Court has said they see the act as quote-unquote serious guidance. Emphasis on guidance.
It may well be that a particular plane ride or a particular trip or a particular form of hospitality, that if you look carefully at the rules, doesn't specifically or clearly violate a prohibition. But I think the bigger problem is that the appearances are really not very good. If I had been invited to some very, very luxurious location by someone who was maybe somebody I was friends with, and then those people were people who had interest before the court, even if they weren't specifically litigants, it just doesn't look right. I mean, it's the wrong question. Well, did it affect any votes, right? Obviously, if it did affect a vote, then you have a quid pro quo and you have a much deeper problem. You have a serious problem. But even if it didn't affect the votes, a reasonable person looking at it could look at it and say, that just shouldn't be happening.
After the break, Judge Fogel thinks the Supreme Court can fix all this by making its own ethical rules. So will that work?
Hey listeners, this is Joel Anderson, host of Slate's Slow Burn, Becoming Justice Thomas. I want to tell you about a live event we're doing on July 25th at 7:30 p.m. at the Hamilton in Washington, D.C. Join me and a few very special guests for a night of conversation, a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the show, and even a few surprises. I'll be interviewing Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of the Judiciary Committee, NYU law professor and MSNBC commentator Melissa Murray, Georgetown law professor Michelle Goodwin, and Thomas's old college friend Eddie Jenkins, a former NFL player and attorney. We'll talk all about the life and career of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, including his decades-long battle with affirmative action. And I'll perform an extended story from the season that may surprise, but will definitely delight you. For a limited number of fans, we will also host a pre-show cocktail hour with the Slow Burn team. And those who purchase that VIP package will get complimentary drinks and time with your favorite Slatesters. And if you're a Slate Plus member, you will receive a discount off your purchase. Go to slate.com/slowburnlive for more information and to purchase tickets. That's slate.com/slowburnlive. Hope to see you there.
So let's talk about ways to potentially fix ethical oversight at the court. And one way, and I know you think it's not the best way, is congressional intervention of some kind. The Senate Judiciary Committee has signaled it's interested in this. And back in the spring, I know you went to go testify. The Senate invited Chief Justice Roberts to testify. There was concern at the time both about the leak of the abortion decision and reports of Clarence Thomas accepting vacations and other goodies from a billionaire. And you were there and you laid out what you thought was appropriate, but it was notable to me that the Chief Justice declined to be there and basically said, this is a separations of power thing. But separations of power doesn't mean that the branches don't talk.
I had a good relationship with the Chief Justice and I still respect him. And I think he was being cautious, and the caution was characteristic of him. He felt that for him to go to the Senate because they asked him to come, it would somehow telegraph that he thought that they would have authority to tell the court what to do. And he's very historically conscious, and he was trying to think back on when Chief Justices have gone to Congress. So, I mean, he had his reasons. I think another thing that doesn't get enough attention is that, he doesn't have the power as the Chief Justice to force the other 8 justices to do anything.
Well, why not?
Well, because he's the first among peers. He controls the administrative apparatus of the court.
So he's got to convince them.
He has got to build some type of consensus, whether it's a 9-0 consensus or a supermajority or simple majority. But it's not going to work, particularly since codes of conduct kind of depend on people buying into them and complying with them. That it's not going to work if he can't build some kind of consensus.
I think you and I are both realists and recognize all the reasons why congressional oversight of the Supreme Court is not going to happen immediately, if at all, but mostly because Congress is having a hard time getting some basic duties done. So this seems like an extra. But I do wonder if the Senate somehow did manage to get some ethical rules through for the Supreme Court, what would happen? Like, would that fly?
It would depend. And I know that's not a...
Would it be appealed to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court would have to decide?
They could issue a statement saying that we don't recognize the Senate's authority to do that. Or they could say, we thank the Senate for its advice and we will consult the rules that they have adopted for us.
Or is the court accountable to Congress, in your opinion?
It's accountable to Congress in certain dimensions. I mean, the fiscal accountability, Congress gives them their budget, how they spend their money, how they pay their employees, their work rules. I mean, all the sort of the administrative aspects of the court that don't impact decision making. I think Congress has some pretty clear authority. If Congress simply said the court should adopt the Code of Conduct for United States judges, the court might say, thank you very much, and we will make a good faith effort to comply. We don't concede that constitutionally we are bound, but we are going to take this as serious guidance and so on. They'll say something like that. The real kicker is enforcement. So as I was saying earlier, if you have if you're a lower court judge and you violate the Code of Conduct, there is a process where somebody can make a complaint, and then there is a body, it's almost always the circuit council that the judge in the circuit that the judge serves in, that can look at the complaint and say, was there an ethics violation? How serious was it? And what should the remedy be? And
you've basically laid out that that's the reason why the whole thing works.
It's because people, you characterize it as an implied threat. I mean, it's a system. You have a code, and you have rules. You have a committee. I think this is very important. You have a committee that you can consult for advice. So, when I was on the ethics committee in California, I would get a couple phone calls a week, and a judge would call me and say, I want to put a lawn sign, or my wife wants to put a lawn sign, or my husband wants to put a lawn sign for somebody's running for school board in my little town, and
you got to tell them no.
say, no, you can't do that. You're not allowed to engage in political activity. And if you co-own the house, I mean, whether you're supporting Joe or not, that's the rule. And they say, really? I mean, that's ridiculous. But that's the kind of conversations you would have, and then people would get that kind of guidance. Now, the court, number one, doesn't have transparent rules, and number two, it doesn't have, to my knowledge anyway, any sort of advisory mechanism. It has a legal counsel who works for the court, who they can consult, they can talk to each other, but there's no independent source of advice that's in any way akin to what lower court judges have. So I think it's both the lack of a transparent set of rules and the lack of any sort of reference point where they can say, okay, we've got this ambiguous question. We're going to go talk to somebody about it, but I'm not going to just talk to somebody who's aligned with me philosophically or, who I'm close to socially. I'm going to go to somebody who is there for the purpose of giving me independent and impartial advice.
So you're saying that it would be hard for Congress to oversee the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court kind of needs to build a system for itself, which actually sounds quite complicated. Like not just a system of rules, but an advisory panel to be the hotline that Supreme Court justices call when they have questions, and then some kind of enforcement mechanism.
I didn't say that. I think that that's probably not doable. I think the enforcement ultimately is going to have to be the justices' own decisions, but their own decisions as informed by the rules that they adopt and agree to follow.
But without the enforcement mechanism, is it going to work?
Well, let's imagine a situation where somebody does something that's really inappropriate. If they do it now, you could get a lot of noise about it, but you don't really have a framework. You don't say, well, these are rules that this justice agreed to follow, and they didn't follow them. They had the ability to get independent advice. Either they didn't get it or they ignored it, and then they did this anyway. And so ultimately the only power that Congress has in the Constitution is the power of impeachment. But if you've checked all those boxes and somebody is still acting in a rogue manner, then at least you have a record that would allow you to consider, well, is this serious enough that you're going to do something like that?
So it wouldn't have actually, even if we had all these rules in place, all the things that have been discussed this term, the private jets, the vacations, all that sort of stuff, it could kind of still happen.
It could, but I think it would look different if you had these other structures in place. See, now it happens, and I'll just use the Justice Thomas example. You have people who don't like Justice Thomas's decisions saying, "Oh my God, he just did these horrible things, and why is he still on the court?" And then you get people who defend Justice Thomas saying this is all a subterfuge because people don't like Justice Thomas's decisions. And so my belief, and hopefully I'm not naive in that belief, is that if you have a set of structures in place where you say, here are the rules that govern these kinds of things, and we not only have rules that everybody has agreed to and the public can see them and the justices can see them, there's full transparency, and we also have the ability to get advice. You could have reached out to this uninvolved and impartial group and said, can I do this or not? And if you still did it after that, then it seems to me that's a very different hypothetical than if you have nothing. In my opinion, and it's based on everything I've done in my career and my longtime involvement in ethics, I think the court needs to be more assertive in this area. And it's like trying to figure out, well, what could it do that would meet the perception that they're not taking it seriously enough. And being defensive and saying there's no problem is not the right answer. I mean, it's just simply not the right answer.
Judge Fogel, I'm super grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for engaging with me a little bit. It was fun for me. I hope it was for you too.
I had a great time, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Judge Jeremy Fogel heads up the Berkeley Judicial Institute. He spent 37 years as a judge. He also ran the Federal Judicial Center, where he helped oversee judicial education about ethics and disclosure rules. And that's the show. What Next is produced by Paige Osborne, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little help from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Handing things off to Lizzie O'Leary and the What Next TBD crew for now. I will be back in this feed on Monday. Catch you then.
Want to feel better, get more exercise, or quit tobacco? Prescription for Wellness can improve your health with personalized sessions based on your schedule. Our expert health coaches and care managers use proven techniques. It's free for UPMC Health Plan members and could lead to the results you want. For more information, visit upmchp.us/pfwellness. That's upmchp.us/pfwellness.